Thank you so much, George, for you're always working with this geometry of mine. I'm so grateful for that because I know that I found it in the body and it taught me what geometry and fractals mean. But it's teaching me all the time, and you've become a really big teacher and mentor to me in relation to geometry. And I'm also really excited to have you down soon to Ojai, March 2nd and 3rd, very soon, in order to we're going to be collaborating and co-facilitating a geometry workshop together. With you being, an animal tracker and teaching us how you got into geometry and nature and what have you. So today we're just going over this because you told me that you found some more really interesting things around it. And so please just take it away. I'm really excited.
Okay, good. Well, I hope you continue to contribute to the conversation because I think you'll be interested in the material for sure, because it is about your shape that you introduced to me, the Kabbalic star that you found in the body. And of course, I'm always trying to figure out how these structures are related to kind of the overall big picture of sacred geometry, forms within forms, the fractal nature, how they all link up and connect. And I did a presentation, that we recorded and, we put that out that, and I had those slides, I put them all together. So I'm going to share the screen and we'll take a look at some of what I did on it and kind of the direction I've gone as of recently. Let me see which presentation this is under. I have a few open. Hold on, let me stop that and look on the back end here where that is. So the it's kind of a continuation with that, and it's also a little bit of a different direction based on some of the things that I saw in relationship to how the form fits into the cube. And we'll just take a look at it here and maybe that will get the ball rolling. All right, I think I got it set up now. Here we go. There it is. All right. I haven't really presented this material anywhere or shared it with anybody in an outward way. So this is kind of the first look at this. I sent you these photos, pictures a little while ago of the Kabbalic star on the right with the proportions that I transferred over from the actual form to the drawing. And, we talked about those, and the prior slides that we went over here are all in this presentation that I did. I believe this is the same presentation we did, but we talked about the dimensions and everything of the dimensions, meaning the proportions here, and the different templates that I was working with to draw it within and things like that. So that was all, we pretty much documented all that. Now these slides here that I previously did, let me zoom in a little bit on this because I'm a little too far zoomed out. We'll go to 111. Okay. So these ones I did a while ago, and I was showing how the Kabbalic star here was inside the cube. Now that's a cube, the big black shape around this, but it's on its axes, right? So it's on its vertices. So, if you had a little cube in your hand, you could kind of spin it around like so, right? So inside there, I was able to draw both of them and put them in there. And then I also saw that you could put it in an octahedron, which is this blue shape over here. And that octahedron is like, we're looking at it kind of like this here. All right. So it's just the big square there with the two lines in the middle. That's basically an octahedron. That's the 8-sided form. Okay. So that was where I left it for a while. And then I came back to it. I'm going to describe how I got to this little shorter shape on the left and why it kind of fit into the cube and into the octahedron and all these other shapes. And I'm going to describe how I got there. So that's what this is going to be about. It's like, why is this a shorter version of what you have over here, right?
And actually, I just want to say, just as you're going into this too, when I found these, I mean, it was done through a sensory experience. And so because I'm not a geometer, I wasn't even looking at specifics except where one point related to another. But I didn't like, what I'm loving about this is that when I see what you've drawn already, it looks like a perfect Herkimer crystal that is a naturally double terminated crystal. And what I was surprised about when I found this geometry in the body without knowing anything about geometry is that it was a double terminated crystal in any form, that it was a crystalline shape, in fact.
Yeah.
And that amazed me. So I'm loving that you're just refining the actual dimensions that make sense in this, because it was not a cerebral, it was not a mathematical alignment. What I was feeling, I was just like, wow, this is what I'm feeling. And I drew it and it came out as this. And I know that it's got a lot of significance in proportions of one top of it to the middle to the bottom, but you're refining this on a whole different level.
Okay, well, great. Well, the forms that it's going to fit in, the cube and the octahedron, truncated octahedron, you're going to see how it relates to the cube octahedron. Like, of course, those are all structures that are found in crystalline structure, right? So they really match. Like this geometry you're going to see as I go through some of these slides, it just plugs right in to all those forms. It's just we're just looking at a part of it, right? So we kind of shaved off the sides of some of these other things to kind of look at, okay, here's this little central core piece of some of these larger things. Now I could do that like pretty easily with this on the left here. The one on the right, it definitely has mathematical proportions to it. It's built on, the squares that we had here, and then I rotated it to different views, and
Yeah.
we get other mathematical proportions. So it still was built, it's still built on a template that has sacred proportion in it, just as much as what we have here on the left. But I guess I didn't go to this on the left looking to discover what you have on the right. Like I didn't say, well, let me try this out. By the time I figured this out, I was like, wow, this looks a lot like what you have over here on the right? What you've shared with me on the right.
Oh, wait, you just kind of cut out a little bit. Can you just clarify that? You mean you found this shape on the left there, just doing your own thing, and then it turned out to look like mine, or you already had it in mind? I'm not clear.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just following my trail in the geometry and finding this shape in the diagrams I'm going to show you in just a bit. And then I said, well, geez, if I take off these pieces on the side of this, basically what I'm left with, like this other geometry that this is embedded in, like if I kind of strip it down and like just focus on this core piece,
Yeah.
then I was like, oh, well, this looks like what you have here on the right, like, but shorter, right? So I
Wow.
wasn't like, let me go and let me see if I could remodel this. I was like, oh, this looks like what you have done over here on the right with this form.
Super cool. Wow.
Okay, so I know I've spent a little bit of time here on this, but let's just go through some of the other things. Now, there's a couple things, and I need some refinement here, or this is going to be some discussion about this bit. So in the form, you have a series of kind of crisscrossing internal geometry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that may be very important for the dynamics of how the energy flows that you follow through the body, right? But what this structure is here on the left, and I drew these to match what you have over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I found in working with it, and I'll show you another slide here, is that it was these hexagon pyramids. Okay, there's these
Mm.
hexagon pyramids that kind of look like these,
Right.
and there's a little cone in the middle of this here that has I have pictures of this in a second. So there's cone, spiral, like each of these have spirals of energy moving through these cones. So basically what I have here is one stacked on top of another one and one at the bottom. And each of these are hexagon slices, 1, 2, 3. And that's what it looks like from the top. Okay. So it's like a hexagon slice. And it's bipyramids, 2 hexagon bipyramids. And here, and this is just another view of it from the side. So if I just turn it to the side, right, just like your form here, if I have the 2 bars in the front,
Mm-hmm.
I rotate it this way, I have just 1 bar in the front, right? So that's what you're looking at on the left. Let me just zoom in and show you what I mean by these hexagon pyramids. So here's kind of a drawing of that hexagon pyramid.
Looks like a
That
diamond.
Yeah, it is like a diamond. So you've got one here and it's pointing down into the center, right? And then another one on the bottom pointing up towards the middle. So this is the meeting point in the middle. Like that's your 0 point. There's many 0 point. I mean, each of these flower of life points is a 0 point. But if we have one in the center, that pyramid is touching down in the middle here, and it's also here. But I have this dotted blue one, which means you can kind of interlock all these, right? Because you got a pyramid in the middle. Now, I know this is different than the internal drawing of the drawings you did, but this is one way that I
I love
started to
it.
work with it. All right. And then you've got this, this is just showing what like a spiral would look like as it moves around the diagram here of the drawing of this pyramid.
So it would make a golden mean spiral?
And it's not going to be a golden mean. It's going to follow a doubling sequence because each of these spirals are half the distance, right? So this meeting point here, the first one it meets here on the
Yeah.
point would be half of the whole length, and then the next one is half from here to here, and the next one's half from here to here. So it's all a doubling sequence pattern. That's just the way the flower of life is kind of designed, is that the fractality of it is built on a doubling sequence, and I'll illustrate that in a few more slides. So here's just another drawing of those pyramids. We don't need to look at that one. Okay, so this is how it fits into the cube, all right? And I just did the fruit of life kind of layers on this. It's not necessary for the drawing. But this red right here and the red here and here, those are on the surface of the cube, okay? So that's right on the face of the cube. And the rest of the structure is kind of like in the cube. And then you have two faces here to the left and right on the cube.
Oh.
And that red, once again, here, well, that's on the face of the cube here and on the face of the cube here.
Okay.
And these hexagons are right in the middle. And this is, of course, a portion of a hexagon here and here. So if you put this all together and like you do all those, here's the red and red and red. So this is the form kind of pulled out of this right here on the right.
Mm-hmm.
If you rotate that cube to a flat face like this, so now it's not faced like flower of life way, it's faced like this. Well, that makes a really interesting diagram. That's called the star cut diagram, which was one of the root foundation geometry templates of ancient history. It's like one of the first well-used diagrams. And that little red piece, of course, is part of the form itself, right? Because this structure right here on the right, if I just slide this over, is going to fit right in the form. So basically what you have is not just one of these, you have them one here and one here and one here. You have them crisscrossing to make the full cube, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's another example.
That's always been an ancient form. Like it looks like something from Islamic mosques or something. Is that what you mean? That form has been one of the originals for millennia kind of thing, or?
This star right here, this star cut diagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just a classic geometer's drawing. You could find the Earth moon proportions built off of this drawing. You can do a lot of things with it in terms of finding different ratios and values in it. Has a big 3-4-5 triangle in it, which is right here. That's the 3-4-5 triangle in it. It just goes on and on and on what's in this diagram. But this is like this little red piece of the form is what's actually on the face, because you can embed that into the cube. And this is just examples of what it looks like from different views, right? So the way I explore the geometry is I'm always rotating the form around to make sure it fits into different forms and into different views, right? So this is your typical hexagon flower of life view, right? So this is going to be the form is like tilted. Now I've uprighted it, right? So if you have it just, this is how you would really like see it in the human body is, from top of the head to lower. The flower of life one is not your best view of that because it's kind of tilting it back, right? Because you've tilted the form backwards. Mm-hmm. But here you have it top to bottom. And if I just rotate the cube still at its vertical orientation and I just turn it to the side, like so, That's what you're going to get over here, right? So these two are comparable, right? It's just I've rotated it to the left and I've rotated it to the right. You know, if this is faced on, this is to the left. And what I'm showing is the red here is that that's always in face with the face. It's always in contact with the face of a cube, right? So this is in contact, in contact. Here you have 3 points of contact, 3 points of contact. For the square view, which is just straight on square, well, you're only going to see one of those because the other one's on the backside, right? So this is all within the sphere, right? So this is the actual same size sphere for all of these. And it's not any different, like these two at the bottom are what I'm showing you here. These are that, or these here. These two, right? So that's straight up and down. And this is what it would look like when you place it in the cube. And then what happens when you rotate it to these different views, which is just important because a lot of other diagrams, and we're going to get to this in a second. Are you good with everything up to this point? Any questions about it?
I'm fascinated.
All right. So this is interesting because this shape right here, when you go into the square version of it, right? So because it looks different for all these, right?
Mm-hmm.
Square version of it, that shape, there's this shape here on the right. That's the same form. It's just like if I took the form and I just was holding it at a certain angle, kind of like that. And it's the same outline of that Kathara grid. Remember we were talking about that the other day?
Yeah.
It's the same outline. There's no different in the outline. But this is a totally different shape to them. You know, I don't know. It doesn't have a geometry that they've defined. So I continue to try and show that it could be this or it could be that, because it could be a lot of things. It's just how do you want to draw lines on this, basically, right? But it's the same outer shape.
But you're saying that, so you're saying the one on the left side is the Kathara grid shape that they use.
Yeah.
And the one on the right, while it looks like the casing is the same, the lines in the middle don't actually correspond to what's on the right here.
That's right, because this is like, these are portions of hexagons, right? This is like a solid object, just like this. Pretend it's solid, and you're not
It
seeing.
looks exactly like the Herkimer crystals that when I can find Herkimer crystals that I put into the jewelry pendants that I make like this.
Uh-huh. Well, it's one view of the form, right? So that's why I like to draw it from different views, because this is the same. You just got to remember, this is the same as all three of these, right? It's just how it's tilted. So it's a perspective thing, really, right? So if you're seeing it in the human, if you're seeing this in the human body like this, it'd be like a different orientation. It'd be like, I don't know. It's hard to describe how you want to view it, like how you view it, but it's the geometry changes. I'm going to get to a few other things here. Let me just show you this.
Yeah, the geometry changes as things move. I think that's what you're saying, right? So that other shape could, yeah, if it were a body, it could be like somebody lying down and happy baby.
Yeah, it's going to be a different. It's going to just. It's depending how your perspective is viewing it at that point in time, right? Like it's gonna. A person looks pretty short if you're looking at them from a steep angle, but if you're staring them out in front on, they could be 6 feet tall, but all of a sudden they're condensed to 3 feet or something if you're looking at them at an angle. So it's just perspective. But this is an interesting piece because that same shape in this square view orientation, right? So this is the same square we're viewing. This is it. In that view, it's actually, if you take the form away completely, like don't look at it as a three-dimensional object, it can be a flat hexagon plane. Like this is what a flat hexagon plane looks like in the square orientation. So this big flat blue hexagon, total flat, like a disc.
Yeah.
But in that perspective, it could be the outline of just a flat hexagon by itself, right? So you've got options of how you look at this. It's never just one thing. It's multidimensional. You know, it's like it pulls you into how you want to perceive it for what it's related to. So that's why
Okay,
the
I want
relationships.
to ask you a question about that because I do all I mean, all geometries do that, right? Like it can pull you
Yeah.
into a different perspective plane.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the beauty of working with this, and why it's, for me, is not to get too fixed on looking at any one thing as always being the way I see it, because the same outline could mean something completely different in a different subset of relationships, right? But it's the same object, like it's the
Right.
same 2D draw.
And then every geometry, that shows why everything is so interconnected, right? Because every geometry, once you have one geometry, you can find all the other geometries essentially as they continue to kind of relate to one another and fractalize out and in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, you have to treat it like these drawings really as just a multi-dimensional seeing object, like a little what do they call that, like a little device where you can like look into and be like, oh, what can blossom out of these lines, but not be like, oh, this is just always a cube. No, like it's not always a hexagon as a cube. It could be this, that, and the other. It could be so many different things.
Right.
So
So let me just interrupt you for a moment to ask a couple of questions.
yeah.
One is, I know that there's a lot of people who've had discussions like everything's about the hexa and then, a hexagram perspective. And then other people are like, it's all just about the pentagram.
Mhm.
And, um, and my point has always been, without being a geometry wizard like you, that, they're connected. Like you can't have it be just one thing or another thing. That's what the human mind does, and that the hexagram and the pentagram are connected within the geometries. Am I incorrect in saying that?
No, I mean, they're totally connected. I mean, in this little short presentation, I'm not, I don't include a lot of golden ratio geometry, the pentagram. I mean, but I've thoroughly explored it, like
Yeah.
to the nth degree. And I mean, I could show you relationships of how this sort of connects in. But when you asked before, like, well, is that going to turn into a golden mean spiral? Well, not in how it's fitting into the structure of the geometry of the doubling sequence, of how these sequence here, each of these red and blue hexagons, they're each fitting into one another at a half the length progression. So this
Right.
red segment is half the length as the blue one above it, and this red one is half the length of the blue, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So this geometry just really fits very well into the doubling sequence geometry.
Right.
Whether it's hexagon or square view. To bring in the golden ratio, what you really start to do is take these forms of the cube, for instance, and then you rotate it into icosahedral symmetry. And
Right.
when you rotate this same cube into icosahedral symmetry, you'll come up with the 5 cubes that produce the dodecahedron. It has one central cube, but you're following the geometry of taking the icosahedron, which is going to always rotate things into 5,
Right.
right? So then you start to you just get a different relationship to these basic root structures like a cube or a tetrahedron and an octahedron, and you're rotating them around. That's how you get, icosahedrodecahedron, this one here. But that's 5 rotated octahedron that give you the vertices. So it's really when you
Can't
rotate.
separate one from the other, and they're not all going to necessarily show, a Fibonacci sequence or golden spiral, but that's just because they're having a conversation over in this part of the geometry, but they're still all very connected. You cannot separate one from the other at all, can you?
Well, not unless you exclude one from the other. I mean,
Right.
and
And that's taking something out. So it's like a natural flow. Like even though the golden spiral might not be found in these geometries are still connected to these other geometries where you would find the golden spiral, right?
Mhm.
Or the hexa would be in one place where the pent is in another, but it doesn't mean that they're not absolutely connected because all the geometries are intermingling.
Yeah, well, there's a thing with the flower of life type pattern where the big outer hexagon, and I don't have any of those slides in here, but I could certainly pull them up if we want to take a look at that. And in that large hexagon, you can view it as like a cube, or an octahedron, or you could view it as an icosahedron. So from that perspective, that hexagon can either be a cube, octahedron, or icosahedron, the same hexagon, right? And there's a form called the rhombic trichontahedron, which is this form here. It's 30 diamond faces. And that's a fusion of the octahedron, of the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. If you put these two together, you come up with this form. This is stuff we'll be talking about in the class when we're together, because we'll draw these forms.
Cool.
Now, if you just have one cube, then it's hard to see that it's embedded into something larger, right? But if you have the big thing that has 5 cubes in it, well, then it's easy to see how the cube is embedded in that. You know, like it's hard to see, if like all you know is the cube, it's hard to see how this is embedded into this. But if I look at this, I could then show you easily how this is, like 5 of these are embedded into this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sometimes a little easier, I found, in how I go about teaching the geometry, is to start off with the big form, like the rhombic trichontahedron, and then show you how all the other forms are embedded in that. But I could do it either way. I mean, you could start with the cube and then show how all these forms are in the cube, but you have to have the golden ratio circles. Like, you can only show these forms, the golden ones, when you add golden ratio techniques to the geometry to show them in the templates, because the templates, they don't, straight up flower of life, and this is what I say in a lot of other videos, this pattern just by itself doesn't invariably just show you the golden ratio in there. You need to add a little more to it to go ahead and show that golden ratio can be drawn in that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do it by itself, because everything there is equal segments, and everything about the golden ratio is unequal segments. It's always 1 to 1.618. It's always never halfway. It's always a little bit above halfway or a little bit below halfway. So you can't have an equal segment template getting you all the right points unless you get creative to how to add the golden ratio in. And that's what I've done in like a gazillion ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it just doesn't do it on its own. It's like, that won't do it by itself.
I love it because it's kind of like how it teaches the mind fluidity.
Yeah.
You know, working with geometry, it's like you can't talk about not being able to judge a book by its cover and all the different things that are available within something, and yet it's still connected to everything. Like, you're not making up that there's a different way to look at it in order to find the golden ratio. You're just looking and creating different perspectives in so many different ways that the mind has to be fluid, and the mind has to be able to use both the left and the right sides of the brain to create that kind of expanded awareness or consciousness, really, of not thinking just in straight lines, but seeing so many different ways of thinking that it enhances the brain. That's what I'm seeing as you're saying.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, there's no force involved in it. You really have to go with the flow and let the templates teach you and reveal what they have to share. And if you can't force something into the geometry, once you really start to understand the pattern language, it's not really about just creating just like an awesome looking cool design and like lines that go here and here. Like, you'll do that anyway, but the lines have meaning, you know, and the templates are guiding how those lines are moving on the paper and why they're moving to particular points. Like, that's what the circle templates do. So once those two things like start to harmonize together, then you just ride that kind of roller coaster of its own energy. And then it teaches you and reveals to you, for me, more about these kind of eternal relationships that are just inherent in the information system that's there. See,
Yeah,
it's like a retrieval.
It's like the silent teacher teaching you mental Aikido.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
this
just
is
got
a
to.
perfect example of why working with geometry is so incredibly mentally enhancing and therefore healing in your body, because your mind, being your nervous system, is watch itself and learning from itself and being taught this kind of mental aikido of fluidity and expansion and interconnectedness of all things, which then naturally translates to how we function in the world, how you build a system, how you build a community, where the inner, just like learning physical aikido, learning your energy in space, learning how to work with others, learning how to not protect yourself as much as just make sure that you are safe and all, like it's doing the same thing with the mind. Sorry, you just sent me on a tangent. That was brilliant. Like,
No, that's fine. I remember like my background was in the wildlife tracking, and like I brought my approach to how I engage in the curiosity and mystery of the unknown when you explore the natural landscape with that open-minded way of going about it. And of course, you do that in relationship with all the things that are out there, but I also had good mentors along the way that kept that doorway open for me to start to relate to seeing the patterns that way, because it's easy to go out there and be so stuck in wanting to identify everything that's out there rather than just letting it speak to you and, be open, like, let's follow it out more, let's just keep on the trail, see what comes out rather than try to find something in it, like that will teach, it's a little bit of both, like you still have to make those assumptions but not be hold on to your assumptions, right? So of course that was all part of my tracking background, that I applied to this material. So much of this is kind of it's like the space holder that teaches you the relationship that you're going to develop. If you go into other areas that someone doesn't hold that particular way of engaging with the material, then that might not get transferred. Like there are some great trackers out there, but they're just good and technical about it and not like mysterious about it. It's hard to describe.
beautiful. Wow, that was really interesting. And we're going to be talking about that too in the geometry workshop. How exactly how your animal tracking history of the last 30 years, and teaching around the globe with that has led you to understanding geometries in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let me get back on track here with a few things because I want to talk about one key form in this that I haven't mentioned yet, which was really the thing that led me into the direction that I made the relationships of how I discovered the form. How I kind of came to this shape. And this can be a little hard to see over here on the left, but this is kind of a portion of the here's the form kind of embedded in, and these black shapes here, and I'm going to have to tease this out a little bit. They're actually two truncated octahedra. Now, the octahedron, if you truncate the octahedron, which is a regular octahedron, of course, this is the regular octahedron, the eight-sided. If you truncate the octahedron at a particular point on it, 1/3 of the length down, you're going to come up with these 8 hexagon planes on there and 6 squares. Okay, so it's one of the Archimedean solids.
Right. So just to clarify, because truncating a shape means that you're kind of chopping a little bit of the head off of it. And Archimedean solids are based on that, just for people who aren't familiar with that. But please, correct me or add anything to that for the clarity of.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to look at it. The Archimedean solids, they all have regular polygon faces. That's one other thing for the Archimedean solids. They're going to have either squares, regular pentagons, all the edge lengths are equal. So they're working with those same basic polygons.
Yeah.
The Platonic solids are made with, but they're using 2 of them or more, right? So we've got hexagons and squares for this one.
Right.
And so this one has this square face in the middle, and you can see there's these hexagons around it from this view.
Yeah.
And if I hold it like this, there's a hexagon version of it, with the straight on view of the hexagon. And then you have the squares and hexagons around it. So different views there. This is another drawing of it. But this shape is found in the inside or merging of these hexagon planes are basically kind of like if I took the top hexagon you have in this and the bottom one, and I squished this down, well, that's the top and bottom, and then there's one hexagon in the middle of this. All right, so let me just show some other pictures here. Here's just the drawing of this colored in. These are the truncated octahedrons at three levels. Each one is half the size of the other. And smallest one, next largest one, next largest one. And it's all right in the flower of life draw. Okay.
And then also the red ones there too are my shape, the original shape flattened down, which is what I see the vector equilibrium.
I know. And I wanted to talk to you about that because that shape, that's the shape I know you cued in on that and led you in the direction to look at this. And one way to look at that shape is that that outline is a flat hexagon plane in and of itself, right? Like in the
Yeah,
drawing,
yeah.
it's a hexagon. And I illustrated that in my last presentation I did on the Kathara grid because they, this is the shape of this Kathara grid over here, right? And here's the same cube octahedron. So this gray outline is another Archimedean solid, the cube octahedron, vector equilibrium, right?
Yeah.
Some people are familiar with that. Like, there's the vector equilibrium. There's the shape, right? Right in the middle.
And there's three of them, in fact, when you look. I've got a great illustration that shows that actually of the vector equilibrium, because it looks like three hexagonal planes that tilted on its side to give you that, and the three of them put together actually create the vector equilibrium.
I know. Well, yeah, it says 4 hexagon planes. There's 3 of them that look like this. And then, of course,
there's
the
the
big
one
outline
surrounding.
itself, the big outline itself is a flat hexagon. So you have the 4, and this is it, right? So basically what I'm showing here is like you can draw lines on this any way you want, right? Like maybe they mean different things for different reasons, but this is based on the Kathara grid unit, because what I was showing in that video is basically if I take this form here, the same cube octahedron, and I rotate it now because it's a hexagon plane.
Yeah.
I rotate it, the cube octahedron, to face so it's in square view. That's what it looks like on the right. And that's what they're calling the Kathara grid. And I'm showing that, well, yeah, it's just a hexagon plane. See, it's a flat hexagon plane that looks just like that. And it's right here in the cube octahedron, not just one of them, but I'm isolating one. And then there's the big one, right? And you could draw this is what those lines would look like if you had it flat, right? They'd be these long triangles like this.
Right.
So that's why it's really important for me as a geometer to keep rotating the view around, because I would have never made the connection between this flat hexagon to this flat hexagon and the cube octahedron in square view, but they're the same elephant. You've heard that story before. I mean, I love that story of the different seers, the blind people who are pulling on the elephant's leg, the elephant's trunk, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, 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 put on the light. We're all talking about the same elephant in the room, right? And that's what the different views give you a window into. And go ahead.
Sorry. So the Kathara grid here, as you see down on the bottom left, right? That's their general geometry. Yeah, there.
Well, no, this is it up here on the right.
That's it up there. Okay. So you know how with my shape, right? Like, I mean, it's a physical shape that, that you've been showing. And I learned from you and also another geometer who had contacted me, Joe Truss, a number of years ago, who said, both of you said, like, a geometry has to be validated in order to have it make sense, which means you've got to be able to see all these different perspectives of it and have it make sense. Otherwise, it's just a nice piece of art, right?
Yep.
So does this Kathara grid here, because it's not in a 3D form, does that mean that it doesn't have to be validated, or is it equally as valid? I mean, it looks to me from a geometric perspective, it's equally as valid as anything else. I don't know how they found it. And I don't know if there's like a physical geometry that can be made out of it.
Well, my last YouTube video that I did on this, I'm trying to get to the bottom of that and looking through some of the manuscripts and looking at, what those drawings are showing, and is there a geometry there? They talk about the Merkaba, the star tetrahedron in there, and they talk about, basically what I showed in my last video is that they are talking about they're treating this, it appeared to me, as a hexagon plane, like, because she showed a little pyramidal, like these double pyramids that I'm showing you in this. Like, she showed a drawing of a pyramid that looked like a pyramid was coming off of this, and another drawing that showed it embedded in other geometry that seemed familiar to me. So I'm not really trying, I don't have a deep investment in trying to make sense of their thing. I'm just trying to, for them, I'm trying to make sense of it for myself and try
Mhm.
to understand how it relates to everything I understand about these relationships of the geometry.
Okay, and also, not to get into a long conversation about this, but in the work that I've seen of theirs too, you know, what's so interesting about geometry is that not only does it relate to physics, it also relates to the mind and psychology, really. And we look at that because the geometry, just like we were talking about, teaches you to think differently, teaches you to look at things differently. Um, you know, for me, it was a shape that allowed me to understand why tensions lock in the body in a certain way and how to release them. But those tensions are orchestrated by the mind having a thought, holding the breath, pulling on soft tissues, and then starting to pull on muscles. And, you know, there's a whole complexity that happens in the body with it. But you can't separate the tension from the mind and the breath any more than you can separate it from the geometry. So that's how I would link together how geometry can be philosophical. Now, what I've read in the things that I've seen of, you know, and I don't really know the people who do the Kathara grid, I have no connection with them at all. But it's like some other things where, like with the Kabbalah, everyone talks about it as a very almost con- mystical kind of psychological way of trying to, in the case of the Kabbalah, get to God, or really in the Kathara grid. I mean, they're talking about different dimensions. Different geometries relate to different dimensional spaces. I don't take this geometry into that level, even though the mind and the body and the geometry are so connected within the breath and within the mystery of even living. But it's interesting, I'm trying to say, that there is an aspect of just being really technical and practical, kind of like what you were talking about tracking, and then getting into the mystical. And this is a very mystical process for me, and my brain even gets so stimulated watching and discussing these things because it's like my nervous system watching itself watch itself. With the Cathara grid, it seems like it's not, the geometry is taken into a very metaphysical, you know, how to get to different dimensional realms, which is something that I don't um, connect with in that way. But I
Mhm.
haven't looked into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't read a lot of the material. I look at the pictures and see what they say to me mostly, and I think that I think I was talking to someone who was a person related to really studying that material a few years back, and I was like, well, is it really just meant to be like a map, right? Maybe it's not about 3D geometry like the way I relate to it. Because my early videos on this subject, I was really showing how, like I'm showing now, like you rotate it this way, you rotate it that way, you know, it could look like this, etc. Um, but maybe it's more, it can be viewed more as like a flowchart diagram almost, right? That you're assigning different things to. That you're using it as like a flowchart diagram like that, right? It doesn't have to be 3D geometry, although they imply so much within the material that yes, it is related to 3D geometry without really showing you 3D geometry of how it really relates. So that's the confusion part. But
I think
for me as a geometer, if you want to just diagram stuff and use things, like just be clear that's what you're doing with it, right? Rather than turn it into some 3D geometry that doesn't really fit into the 3D geometry that exists. You know, it can't be that multidimensional because I study all the dimensions drawings of like all the great geometers who studied the dimensions. I've drawn things from them. So you can't really say that it's just from a higher dimension because most things at higher dimensions, they work their way down to the lower dimensions and have projections that can be 3D geometry, even from 5 and 6D geometry, can have a three-dimensional representation of that.
mhm. It's, yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to discover there, really. Is,
Right. So I mean, it's kind of like people will use a triangle to say mind, body, spirit. You know, we can ascribe different concepts around a geometry to create the path and see how things are connected. I think I think I'm reiterating what you're saying, or I'm saying my own thing in there. I don't want to speak for you, but I think what I heard you say is that the idea too is having something like, how does it apply to your body? How does it, for me, the shape that I found in the body was a very direct sensory experience that actually shows you intersection points within your own torso where things are held and pulled. And rather than focusing on the exterior, it's allowing you to connect with the interior and understand how to release, and the nervous system responds in a different way. And yet at the same time, this is a shape that is connected within all of the other geometries. And then once we get into geometry, we get into how the mind works as well. So I kind of like how this Kabbalic star geometry that I have stumbled upon, to me anyway, speaks really clearly to both the physical and the energetic, the
Mhm.
mental and the emotional.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, like I said, I've already taken a look at what the form that you've created, how it exists, and um, in terms of the proportions, maybe a little different because this is what you came up with as a model representation. Like you're trying to make a model out of what something is kind of etheric to you, right?
Right.
And I've already showed that that fits into all these other diagrams and sacred geometry. So
Mm,
in the previous videos that we've done.
yeah.
So yeah, that's this, you know? And then all I'm showing you here is just kind of this other trail of this other form that for me looks similar to this. That doesn't discredit or deny what this is because I got it in hand. You know?
Yeah, no, but it also speaks to the crystalline nature of whatever it is that I'm finding, which, my left brain East Coast side was like, you are not a crystal person made of light. And my 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 right brain is like, oh yes, you are. So I just love that it's kind of continuing that theme of, a double terminated, it's a totally a Herkimer crystal. And I put some Herkimer crystals in this shape when I make pendants. And so I just love it. Anyway.
All right,
I'm
let me show a
yeah.
few more slides here that maybe we'll get back to that in a second. But this is that truncated octahedron that I'm talking about. I think it's a really key form, and I've been doing a lot of study on it for the past 3 or 4 months now.
Mhm.
This is pretty big little, pretty big object that has these spirals of both the pyramids of the cones from the square faces and the big hexagons going into it as well.
Yeah.
Um, and these are the spirals following the doubling sequence. This spiral I found out would match what they call the crystal spiral perfectly going in there because it's following a doubling sequence. So I
Uh-huh.
put the crystal spiral into a three-dimensional trajectory rather than it being like a flat design. And and I think I've seen like the first person who's done that and showing the doubling sequence how it actually moves and in the 3D forms like this.
Oh,
But
wow.
it is from the top down the same as the spiral that they're showing. And this is if you took one of these two tetrahedra, like these are two regular tetrahedra, and one single tetrahedron, of course, is just this. You took another and slid it together so another point was sticking through here. Well, that creates this cone in the middle of the two of them. And that's essentially what is in each of these square, which in each of these hexagon faces here would be
Okay.
this shape. And that is this here, right? So that's what these pyramids are that I'm showing you in the form. And that's how they meet at the middle, right? So if you're following the spirals or whatever, like this is how energy I find moves through these geometric cones is really just containers or cones of energy, like the really, or the form itself, it's really just a container for energy to move through.
Yeah.
So
Like,
like a
and
different,
one moving one way and the other moving the other way, and them doing the same thing at the same time, like one kind of going down, one going up, and yet they're happening simultaneously. That's what I see. Does that make sense?
yeah, well, that's what I like. That's what I try to illustrate with these. Is this is why you have these cone structures? You know, this is why these cones are important to show what is inside the geometry of how something can vortice down into a center point and come back out the other side and end up on the other side of that, right?
Right. Right.
And that's what this is what this is here. This is what from top, coming through down in here and coming back out, and that's
Mm.
all in the truncated octahedron.
And then when you look at Nassim's double terminated, not double terminated, sorry, but the toroidal, the two toroidal fields together.
Double torus, yeah.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah. That's the same idea, right? And that middle point in the middle is where the two tori or toruses would connect. Yeah.
Right, yeah, this is kind of what I'm showing here at this one is, um, I guess I got a better example of that because this is kind of basically what you'd want to do is show this one just kind of going up towards the center here.
Yeah.
But this is a smaller pyramid and smaller pyramid and a smaller pyramid and a smaller pyramid. There's just following a progression of doubling sequence. Now you can do the same thing with the golden ratio divided edge lengths if you want. And I've done all that with the Russian pyramid material that I've worked on because that really shows the Russian pyramid material. And I've got a gazillion other drawings of how this doubling spiral cone works and, have the cones drawn and the spirals on the cones for the doubling sequence. And I've also done that for the Russian pyramids as well. This spiral just followed the doubling sequence, in my opinion, because that's how the geometry is nested inside each other. So, that's how that drawing works. And then when you put it into like a full form, and so this black out hexagon here, you see the red pyramid coming off the top and a red pyramid below, and then you got a pyramid over to the right, pyramid over to the left. Well, if you put it, that would be a cube, basically. It's just a cube. Like those eight vertices just end up giving you a cube. But these are now having these pyramids and that shape that I'm showing you inside of it. And it's off this truncated octahedron at the middle. And if you put the little square pyramids on the other side, right? So those are the square pyramids that are going in the form. It's like the inside becomes the outside. So if you flip this around and go this red pyramid down into the middle, that'll go straight to the middle. If you flip it out the other way, it creates a cube.
Right. We're looking at a stellated, what is the word I'm looking for? The base.
You're looking at a stellated truncated
cube octahedron.
Yeah, the truncated octahedron. Because if you
I'm
just
looking on the left with the blue, because you've got the there, and then you've got the hexagon, the hexagram there. So it wouldn't be a stellated cube octahedron.
No, because it's a stellated truncated octahedron. Because if you do the pyramid, this blue one here, this is the square pyramid. That's going to give you a vertex out here, and you do 6 of those. And if you do the red ones, well, that gives you this rhombic dodecahedron, which is the compound of both the cube and the octahedron. But remember, you want to talk about crystalline structure, look up rhombic dodecahedron and crystalline structure. You're going to see a gazillion forms out, gazillion crystals that are rhombic dodecahedra. It's huge. I mean, rhombic dodecahedron is the form that is the one most closely spherical packing form. So if you put a little ball in this and you packed a bunch of these around, hold on, I have one over here. I made this one a while ago. Like this form is like 100 something of these little rhombic dodecahedra all linked together, and they could all be little spheres all linked in there. It's like, and it's going to recreate larger versions of itself when you keep packing rhombic dodecahedra together like this. So this is like your closest packing spherical structure is the rhombic dodecahedra, which is this is just one of those, right? But that's what you're looking at here. And in the form that I'm sharing, this red top here and this red below, the core of it is this structure that I'm showing way back at the beginning. This is the shortened version.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's the shortened version. This is the red sticking up and the down below, and this is what's internal to it is just embedded in the form here. So I just don't have all the lines drawn on there. So all right, so that's kind of the overview of that material. Just a few other things of this truncated octahedron. You could put them together in ways that you could do like the rhombic dodecahedron, but they're all linked up. So it really doesn't matter. It's just like where you want to divide the lines in the geometry at some point. But I did find that working with this truncated octahedron gave me the hexagon planes to like show why there would be 3 hexagon planes stacked one on top of the other. And I'd say probably just to kind of sum that up is like, that is, if you have 3 stars, 3 hexagrams, right, lined up one on top of the other, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And this form here, I guess that's probably the big bridge. Like that's how I made the link from one to the others, because I have 1, 2, 3 that I could have one internal to this, right? That gave me 3 stacks of hexagon, and then I just basically showed how this was connected to all that other structural geometry, and I guess that's why it's shorter. Like why all of a sudden I made a shorter version of this with those pyramids, because of now when I link this to the cube and I link this to the octahedron and I link it to all other things, it's fitting in those precise placements of those hexagon planes. Like they're not just there for any old reason. Like that hexagon that's in the middle, that's at the heart of the cube octahedron. So the cube octahedron is right inside this, right? Right at that inner hexagon plane.
Right.
So you're going to the 0 point is inside this form, right? Because this is just inside the cube, which is 0 points in there. It's inside all the things have to have the center point that they all geometry comes out and around, right?
Right. And just like Nassim's isotropic vector matrix, or Bucky Fuller's IVM, and then the way that Nassim works with it. And the center has always got the cube octahedron or the vector equilibrium in the middle of it, which is always representing the 0 point field.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this of course has that in it. The cube has that in it. The octahedron has that in it. I mean, they all have that in it. The rhombic, they're all going to have that center point in the middle. It's just, when I'm asking myself, well, how does this form, relate to that vector equilibrium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm looking for how it's going to branch out off that center point to create the rest of the structure that's around it, right? So that's why these placement of these hexagon planes, at least for me in this form, and this probably why I went to the shorter version of it, like with these pictures here. The shorter version allowed for it to kind of fit into the vector equilibrium, into the cube, like connect to all those things, because now the proportions are all going to be scaled into these 3 hexagon slices, 1, 2, 3. They're all going to be in alignment with all these different versions of the cube.
Right. And even if I mean, I don't have the big screen on now to kind of show in my shape here, but if in the top one, do you want to just, I don't want to actually stop this, but at the very end I'll show, because I don't want to stop your sharing. But if
I got images over here of that. So let's see. I have these.
Yeah. So you see, like, well, that's not a really good one. Or like, okay, so even on the left on the bottom here, right, you can see how there's a point there where the circle stops halfway through. Stop in halfway through, up there. Right in that point there. Like if it were scaled down to that, wouldn't that be the same shape?
No, because this is the proportions you need to look for, is the height of these hexagons. Like this is that hexagon plane, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
So this is 3 squares stacked on top of each other. So when I rotate those squares, this is what they're going to look like on the right. And that proportion is then not going to, it's got to be like, it's going to be a little, well, I mean, it can be that way. I mean, I've showed it right here. You could put basically, let me see here, this version here. So here it is in the cube. Like this is the long version, right, of the K-star. Now the question for me is, where's this hexagon up here? Because the center one is good. Like that's going to be the same hexagon, even in, I don't know if it's the same width. It might be the same width. But that one right there, let me take this whole picture and move it over here. I'll copy it and bring it over to this. Where's that slide? Okay, this is the one with all of them. All right, so, okay, here it is. Let's get this one out of here. I want to just compare I'll make these two cubes the same size. I'll put one right over the other. Let's see how they're going to line up. Okay. This will take a second.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to make, I want to just see how the proportions are going to lay out with one
Yeah.
another. It's kind of a crude way to do it, but it's going to give us a basic idea because I can get it scaled roughly to the same size. This is why it's important to always, this is why the techniques have to be the same between each drawing.
Yeah, and I think aren't the techniques a little bit different? I'm not sure. Like I would have thought that halfway in the top.
But the cube is going to be the same, right? The cube is going to be the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
size. That's what's going to be our kind of way to look at them. All right, now let me duplicate this page and delete that other stuff and drag this into the middle so it's not in the bottom there. Duplicate this slide and get rid of this other stuff at the top here. All right, let me drag these up. All right, let's take a look at this now. Okay, we're gonna go zoom in a little more. All right, cool. All right, so, all right, now this is what we have going on here. I'm going to just slide one over to the left so we could see a little bit more of it. Now it looks like they're at the same heights, right? It's the same height, 1, 2, 3 across.
Right.
The same cube. So the height is good. I think what goes on here is that it's not shorter. I guess that's not. I'm glad I'm doing this because now I can understand it a little better. The height is the same in the diagram. It's the width, I guess, is what has changed.
So here's my thought. If you took the longer one and you made it longer so that the midpoint between the first horizontal line and the peak at the top was in the middle so that that matched where the peak on the more Herkimer style one was, that would make the width of this be wider, and I wonder if it would match up then. This is
Okay.
my very novice way of working with geometry.
Well,
You do it with numbers.
describe that one more time. What were you saying? I gotta catch that one more time. Do what?
Okay, so if you brought the top green horizontal line on my shape on the left,
Yeah.
and halfway or whatever that geometric point is between that and the very top of it. No, the very top of it.
This point you're talking about here, right?
Yes, that point right there in the middle. If you
Yeah.
put that on the very apex of the shape on the right, so that and expanded the whole shape, so it did the same thing at the bottom, that would bring the width out from the middle of this shape, and I wonder if it would match more cogently then.
All right. Well, we could try it. I already scaled these. Let me duplicate this again so I don't have to rescale it again. I wonder if that angle will work. We'll just have to. It's going to be rough.
I mean, and it's not doing it really mathematically specifically, but this is just how my mind works in geometry.
We can make it like, I guess what you want to do is just make the width the same, right? And see what happens.
Well, it would have to correspond to it being at the same point mathematically as the middle part.
Let's just see. I'm making them roughly the same width.
I mean, I think we'd have to do it more mathematically specifically. We can talk about that another time. I don't want to.
Well, this is just going to give us a eyeball version of it, just to see if it's looks like there's something.
See, I would still make it smaller because the very peak, yeah.
I'm just bringing it down, yeah, so I can line it up. All right, there's the same width, And
Okay, and it's the same width, and you see how it's that midpoint in my shape right there, yeah,
yep.
on each side. That's what I'm thinking is the point where the two meet.
All right. Well, I could check that out and see what the edge lengths are between the two of these cubes, see if there's some ratio that shows up there, because
Right.
I want to basically know how much larger this is going to be than the cube below it. That would be interesting to know. I can't tell that from here.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
yeah,
well, more
we're
food
taking a
for
look at.
thought later.
Yeah, yeah, I'll take a look at that
Thanks for letting me digress.
and see if that hits the midpoint and just see if that all adds up. It's not too hard for me to.
Yeah, no, I love that you understand my brain and I understand your brain enough to be able to communicate in these complexities. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's kind of the overview of I think I had there. Was there any other slides that I had here? Oh, well, I had this one here.
That I really liked. Yeah.
Yeah, now that would be, whoops, let me get a larger screen here, smaller. So this one, I don't know what happened there.
See, that to me looks like a chakra when they talk about chakras, which, is its own discussion anyway, to get into that. But because what we think we've been taught about chakras are actually kind of different historically. But as far as how energy flowing and meeting what I would call an intersection point in the body, this is a really beautiful example of it. So for me, just to kind of break this down to people on a physical level, if we're looking at something like this, let's say the top of it is the top of your shoulder. And that's where you feel like a nagging pain. And the one on the left, the cone on the left, is the front of your pec that feels really uncomfortable, and the one at the back is that nagging pain in your shoulder, and then the one below that is going down and communicating with the organ underneath, whether it be stomach or spleen on the left side or liver, gallbladder on the right. And the point that people we are focused on using the top of the body where the cones meet the red part and thinking that they're not actually connected all together. But if you actually can understand that there's an interior point that's actually holding the core of where tension is, and you think or work on the shoulder, at the top of the shoulder or the front of the pec or the back of the shoulder blade as a bodywork therapist, or even in stretching yourself, and you keep your mind in where the center is because your mind can locate the center, the whole nervous system releases in a whole different way. And that's what I've seen in 30 years of working on bodies, and 20 years of being taught this geometric understanding to the body. So I love this shape because it illustrates really perfectly for me how geometry and the body and tensions and how we can release them are all connected. Did I make that? Was that clear? Did that make
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. I really appreciate that. Yeah, that's the only reason I came up with this shape is, yes, I think it was a chakra too, a chakra when I was making it, and had a visualization after making it and holding it. Like that's my first impression of it, and the only reason I got to it is because of the truncated octahedron, right? Because this is a truncated octahedron. This is a spherical truncated octahedron. These
right?
cones that you see here, these 6 cones, there's 4 in this one on the right. There's 6 in here because you have one in facing you and one going inwards, right? So you have 6
Yeah.
points meeting in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, these are those hexagon faces and those are those square faces that are holding it. That's why I say that those forms are just the container for how the energy moves through the container.
Yeah.
And I made it spherical like this so you can kind of get a window inside the solid structure, right? This would be no different than this giant form that I made here. If you took away all the big hexagon shaped pyramids,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you just were left with these 6 little square ones, right? That's the same shape, which is the same shape that this whole thing is part of, right? Except it's focused on the square faces, right? And this is a really, I think, important thing that I think to discuss is, I know the orientation of the hexagon plane with the hexagons facing up, but in the same truncated octahedron, you can have the orientation like this with the square faces up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a bit of a distinction in how the rest of the geometry is going to line up. And this slide here kind of shows that, right? So if you have octahedron, right? So the octahedron, remember, is the this little guy here. Like if that's oriented up, right, and you truncate that, well, then you're left with square faces facing up and down. And that's what this is right here. That's square faces up and down. The hexagon faces are off to the left and right. Now, if that is the up, and I don't know if up and down actually matter, but this is something I'm always studying and thinking about a lot in terms of the relationship with the geometry is which way is north or up, right? Which way is up?
Mm-hmm.
So this would be the two hexagon pyramids slid together, right? And this would be the cube, right, that I'm showing in all the other images. And the same form I've been showing would be cubed like this. This is your classic star tetrahedron Merkaba. Look, if you have the octahedron facing up, the cubes are going to be flat, like they're going to be based down like this, but the octahedron is oriented like this, right? The octahedrons, right. But the two spirals are coming from different points in the form, right? So this little image here illustrates there's like different entry points into the form through the square faces or the hexagon faces. The square ones, you get 6 points of entry. The big hexagon faces, you have these 8. And when you put it into icosahedral symmetry, remember that's now rotating this all the way around. You got a lot. You've got a sphere basically, right? And that's what icosahedral symmetry does. Is it makes a fuller sphere, because anything you put a pentagon at the top of automatically breaks hexagon flat geometry. You take one strut out of that whole hexagon plane, make a pentagon, now you've introduced curvature into something that typically wants to be just flat and straight, right? And that would be icosahedral symmetry. But we're just talking about these two, right? Without doing the rotation of icosahedral. But this is the basic, like you got 8 points through the cube faces and 6 through the octahedron faces. And that's kind of, it's kind of an ongoing debate, because for me, in terms of energetically thinking about it, because the Merkaba, light body, Merkaba, that's always a star tetrahedron perspective. That always puts the cube on its vertices. Mm-hmm. And then you have this octahedral version. So I don't know. Any thoughts on any of that?
No, I need to absorb all that. My brain is now just absorbing.
All right, good. Well, it's just, I know you work with the body a lot. You're into perceiving energy. You're into energy perception flows. The interesting thing with the geometry is I could look at the same thing left and right and have the same lines drawn on the form. And from here and here, they're two entirely different things. This is all on the left. This is all hexagon. This is all square. This is all octahedron. This is all cube, right? And this is all, these two at this point from this view, the geometry, it looks entirely the same, but the structures are totally different. It's like the difference between a hexagon pyramid like this or a square pyramid, square pyramid like this.
Right. So the way that I would relate that in the body, for instance, and the way that I even learned that there were planes of energy inside the body that I was tracking, is that even though we just looked at that thing with, it had the 4 directions on it basically, and I described how you could have the pec in the front and the shoulder at the back and what have you. Yeah. There are a million different angles all within that. So when I'm teaching somebody how to work on a body to find these inside connection points where the core of the tension really builds in the body, and like fabric, if you put your hand in the middle of that and you started to twist, it would pull on all the 4 areas. But there's not just 4 areas. There's all of these other geometries and angles involved. So when you're working on oneself, you can just think about the core energy. That's easier. Even when you're working on a body as a therapist, if you are touching a point, there is a particular angle you need to feel. And then it's like it locks into place in the center. And it's never it's very similar angles, but if you actually, if I had the mind, and I do not, to be able to map out, like I think if your mind and my mind got melded together and worked on a body, there would be an amazing ability to actually map out the variety of different angles involved to get down to the center. But ultimately, they're limitless, right? Because just like a ray of sun, there's not just one ray, it creates rays all around it. So this is like a very simplified, direct version way of describing how tension actually starts in the center, and we think it's on the surface. And yet the practicality of working hands-on to get into it, this is a good place to start. And yet it can also include any angle, and then it has to be a sensory experience in order for you to really feel the lock-in, and therefore the tension release that you can create through the nervous system.
Okay, yeah, I got you. That's it's a lot more complex because remember, you're moving to something organic and you're moving from something that is just a straight
Yeah.
line linear geometry that is like, once again, it's always like it's just like a roadmap pointing in a particular direction. It's a meant to unlock the educational opportunities to use these as, you know, teaching devices to help us shift our awareness or viewpoint of things. It's
Well
always
said.
pointing in that direction, and very truthfully pointing about it because it these things are elemental to all the elements and relationships at all these different levels, right?
Yeah.
From the physical to non-physical relationships. So it's good that we're able to kind of have these types of structures to stimulate the way to see deeper into things than we typically could, or have an insight and manifest it that becomes a tool that helps us see something we couldn't articulate otherwise very easily.
Yeah, and I
So,
just saw something I haven't seen before as you were saying that, looking at this thing, that's the Templar cross, which is very, very predominant in a lot of physics and different things of that nature. And so I see the Templar cross perfectly in that. That's why I think I really love this shape so much, but I just saw a new version as to why. And of course, once we have, just a riff on the thought that you were just saying, once we have the 3D version of something like my shape, we lose the idea that it's actually a living organism. It's showing movement and action, but you're freezing it for a moment in order to catch the concepts that are actually expressing themselves and speaking to you, speaking to one without words through the use of symbols. And it's like the greatest teacher.
yeah, yeah. I mean, as you know, I've gone deep into learning from this directly, pretty much from what you see here and the trails that I followed through discovery of what is unveiled in the 2D shapes, and realizing that yes, they can be 2D, they can be 3D, and they're also higher dimensional geometry there. It really stretches the mind's capacity to hold all that at once, right? And
Yeah.
also be able to move between any one of those and kind of be hanging out at that plane with the forms, looking at them through that lens, and then entirely shift, right? It's like recently I did a video on Metatron's cube and the design, just the line drawing of it, and showed that could be completely constructed out of these pyramids. I don't have a slide of that right here, but out of these square pyramids, the same line pattern can be completely constructed out of pyramids. So when we're looking at something for so long, that's a cube, that's a cube, that's a cube, you know, containing these things, then you can look at the whole line structure completely different. Tetrahedron edges become edges to pyramids. Then it's like, oh, there's so much more potential in this than I realized, right? And it's not the potential in that, it's the potential in me. You know, it's potential in us. That is not the potential that's just there. It's both. It's like that's a mirror of our potential. You know, the more you look into that, it's really mirroring back. It's not, you know, what our true potential is, of how many ways of expansive creative ideas that can be drawn from that. So that's really exciting to me. And I think it's a great area for geometers to get together and discuss the different ways they see things, or body workers, like they always get together, discuss and describe how they are looking at these same shapes from different angles. And you're not locked, if you're doing geometry the way I do it, you're not locked in any one particular view, but you learn a lot from everybody's perspective. So when I go back to those diagrams, I get so much more enrichment out of it because I learned that other way of seeing. you know?
Yeah, and if that's not a life lesson on how to function on this planet, I don't know what is.
Well, that's why this is a mirror to that mirror to that opportunity to continue to expand our consciousness and relationships, not only just through discovering these cool little things, to being a different person on the earth, but um, one other thing that, I mean, I think I'm done with the slides, but as you were mentioning, I forgot I made that form. And because you were saying a while, could I do the jitterbug on the form you made? And I made it out of this.
Can you stop sharing so we can
Yeah,
see
yeah,
this?
I'll stop it so you can check it out. It's not going to look like much, but I made the shortened version of that version that you did like
Yeah,
this, but I made it with the different proportions with the double pyramid structure meeting in the middle. And I was just showing, so here's the one pyramid pointing down, here's the
yeah,
other pyramid pointing up.
uh-huh.
These are kind of the faces, but I could get the twist going on here as if one were going left and one were going right in this. Um, and that would be, I perceive it more as spirally movement through this. And here's your 0 point at the center of the form, sandwiched between the two pyramids. Now, you could have a pyramid off the central hexagon plane. That would just meet at the center of this other hexagon here. So these pyramids are always going to meet at the center of another hexagon, because at the center of any hexagon or any square or center of anything is always going to be that 0 point, right? Is going to be at the center. And that's what this is. This is just one little example of where the two meet. But you got a
Right,
hexagon here, so now that's going to go up to the next center. And they all link up that way.
right. And the
Um,
reason that that can't be jitterbugged, in my perspective, is because it's not going to collapse into itself, because those pyramids actually have to keep moving into one another. And in a 3D form, it can't do that. It has to be liquid energy, doing
yep,
that. That's what I
yep.
see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I think it's just a container or an example of how this energy in a very organic way is actually moving. And this is just kind of giving me a little bit more insight into that and connecting it to a source point, like that point at the center you're describing between all those things. If that's released and you get to that point, then all of a sudden you're kind of doing this major overhaul on the whole system. Well, that's your 0 point at the center there. That's like the key spot.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I want to show you something that I just found. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll wrap up, because I know this has been a really long time. I'm so grateful for this. Let me just share my screen. Um, this is something I wrote a long time ago called The Key to Spin, in trying to see what I was seeing in the body. So here's the vector equilibrium. You can see the 1, 2, 3 of the actual shapes, outline of the shapes that I ended up finding in the body before I even knew about this. In fact, I think Nassim wrote a paper called The Key to Spin, so I'll have to change the name of it, but I wrote this a long time ago. And maybe I didn't know that he had called it that. Let me just get down to, so I'm just discussing different aspects of what I'm finding. The hexagonal
Geez,
shape.
you never sent this to me.
No, I haven't. No one's seen it. I'm still working on it because I'm stuck right here. And you, I know, can explain this to me. I thought that maybe that this shape had a pentachoroid structure of the vector equilibrium. That's the
Mm-hmm.
phrase that came to mind. I have no idea if that is actually true, but this shape just had too much similarity to what it was to, yeah, see, I finished. I haven't actually, because this shape can actually go into my Kabbalic star shape, and yet it's based on a pentachoroid, I mean a pentagonal structure. And so what I was seeing was a unification between the penta and the hexa here too. And this apparently is a pentachoroid structure. Do I write anything here in the center of the torus? No. Does this make any sense to you? I guess that's the short version.
Well, yeah, I mean, that orthogonal projection of that there, I mean, if it's a 5-cell structure, that picture on the right there, there's something called the 16 cell, which is It's a fourth dimensional shape. So you're dealing with higher dimensional geometry here. So if, if you're going to rotate the 5-cell helical ring you're seeing on the left there, and it's going to wind up looking like that as an orthogonal flat projection, right? And all of a sudden, you're dealing with a higher dimensional geometry, probably fourth dimensional geometry or fifth dimensional geometry. I'm guessing probably fourth.
Uh-huh.
I want to see what I haven't read anything about the 5-cell helical ring, but I know that the orthogonal projection is a 16-cell on the right. So this may be a portion of some other fourth dimensional.
Okay, so what I'm seeing in here is exactly the shape that you're discussing. Here's 1, 2, and 3 lines across. I'm hoping that my cursor is being seen on the screen in the recording.
Yeah, I see it.
You've got these 6 points on the side, which are the 6 points that I see in the body down each side, and then the middle line here. And this is actually the same shape as the kind of, double terminated Herkimer crystal or the Kathara grid kind of thing. And that's where, I was led to this shape as like somehow this is connected to what I was finding in the body, but I didn't know how, and I don't know how.
Well, it's 2 hexagons. I mean, this is getting to this tree of life. It's trying to get to what the tree of life is, because the tree of life is just 1 point away from creating the tree of life. If you put 1 point to the right there, you're going to have a triangle at the bottom, and the top, it's going to be just like the tree of life. And my last video is trying to describe what the tree of life is. Like, you can look at that as 2 cubes, like 1 cube stacked on top of another.
Uh-huh.
And if you're holding that just right in the view, you can see that it would just be 2 hexagons. And this is a top point and bottom point. That would add the other 2 points. But if it's fourth dimensional, and I rotate that to an orthogonal position that has not looking like a square anymore, but a pentagon, the only thing that could take that hexagon geometry and rotate it to something else that looks like a pentagon has got to be of a higher, it's got to be of a higher dimensional
Right.
state.
And that's the direction that I've been going. Have you seen where this shape, I change it and I tilt it back, and then you see the Kabbalah, the tree of life in it?
I've got a lot of it. I've got a lot of forms like that. I mean, I have one over there that I just
But I'm
built.
just wondering if you've seen the graphic that I did.
I don't think I saw that one.
Okay, I'm gonna just try to find it really quickly.
Let me find my little form that I made just like that the other day.
Oh, we're dangerous, George. I don't think we're ever gonna stop. Let me just see. I have to find that. If anyone's listening to this, it's like now's a good time for a pee break and to like take a breath and go get a tea.
I haven't even showed this form in a video, but it's a fun little take apart one. But all right, so before you put that on, so here's like the tree of life pattern, right? The design on it.
Yeah.
And it's 3-dimensional, so it's going to look a little sloped. And I was trying to figure out why there's a big equilateral triangle at the bottom. Now in 2D, this will look just like it, right? But if I tilt it this way, then what it is one of those long pyramids that I've been talking about down here. One of these. It's got a shape in the middle of the cube and this at the top. I mean, it looks totally different. But anyway, if I take this apart, this is the same thing. Same outline of the tree of life. And if I flip this up, I could take out a smaller pyramid that is inside that. It's like Russian dolls. I could take out another pyramid.
Wow.
Another pyramid, and then I take another one out, and then I got a little octahedron that's down in the middle. Like it's all just connected, and pyramids within pyramids intersecting one another just all the way through the whole thing. But I don't really know what they meant. The tree of life design could be so many different types of things. I have at least 4 or 5 videos out there that I say, oh, the tree of life could be like this, or it could be like that. But then it may just be a roadmap that we were talking about before to just describe different points in someone's journey that they're moving throughout their various stages of life, or where they're hanging out on the tree, or things they've got to move through. So then it's more like a psychoactive kind of meditation guide, like step to step, you go through this step, then you go through this step, like that. And even though it looks like 3-dimensional geometry, and I could turn it into many things 3-dimensionally, there's nothing that says that's exactly what it is, right? There's nothing that says this is the tree of life. It has a three-dimensional structure that I'm aware of.
Right. Well, and that's why this kind of felt like it was. I'm really frustrated that I cannot find this right now. Because I can find the one where it turns it up, but then I put it's in my film, and I have no idea why I cannot find it in these files right now. It's really challenging for me.
But you're saying it's this form that you tilt back and then it is the tree of life?
Totally fits in. Yeah. And I'm just frustrated I cannot find the whole form. 1 second. So I can show you one thing, but it's not got the where you lay it over top. Maybe you can just see it without that. So somehow I found that I have it in my film. Okay, well, I can show you this, but it doesn't, again, it doesn't have the form on top of it. Let me just I'm gonna go to advanced, or I guess I can just okay. So if we start this at the beginning, there's the shape face on. And if you tilt it up, the tree of life fits exactly over these points beautifully. And that's what's in my film. I'll try to, before I put this out, I'll find it and do a clip of it from my film. I don't know why I don't have it where all of because the animator put the tree of life over it and it fits perfectly as soon as you angle it up.
All
So
right.
I actually feel like it's two Kabbalic stars put together, two Kabbalahs put together in like it's the one triangle. So here's one triangle without the other side put together. Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just the one side and that tilting up, and then the tree of life fits in perfectly to those points. I'm so bummed I don't have it all right here for some reason.
That's all right. We weren't super prepared for what we were planning
What
on
we
doing.
just dove into.
Um, yeah, it's just this fascinating journey. Well, I've had fun doing that, and I'm glad I got to share that stuff with you that I've been sitting on for a while now, for a couple, maybe a month or more. We talked about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm still looking for this thing, hoping it's going to make a difference, but I don't think it will. I'll try to find it and include it into this video before I release it. Thank you so much, George. That was a lot longer than I expected, but I think that we could talk for hours, and I definitely have a lot of stimulation in my brain for having the opportunity to just kind of learn from you in this way. And thank you so much for all you do. I think you are one of this century's most remarkable geometers. I really do. Thank you so much
Well,
for
thanks.
your skill.
I appreciate it. That was a lot of fun. I always love sharing all these things that I get a chance to share with you and talk about it with someone who's really exploring this stuff and studying it. So thanks for having me for this short little bit, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah,
When
I'll
we,
see you in a couple of weeks. And so just for anybody who's thinking if anyone is still here listening to the recording at this point, we're going to be doing much lighter geometry than that, but still clearly very fascinating about why geometry. And George is going to take us on a hike to understand about patterns in nature. And we're also going to be doing some embodied part of it that I'm going to be leading in the mornings to help you understand how to unlock tensions based on these principles. And then we're going to be doing some drawing in the afternoon and really dialing in so that our brains are just getting a really beautiful magic carpet ride. So thank you, George. I'll be picking you up at the airport soon, and I look forward to seeing you for our March 2nd and 3rd retreat or workshop.
all right, great. I'll see you there. Thank you.
Wonderful.